Good morning, everybody. Well, thank you all for being here today, and welcome to the Los Angeles Unified Homelessness Response Center. It is housed here in our Emergency Operations Center, which obviously was busy over the last few days. This is going to be the first of our regular briefings on the city's role in Los Angeles' fight against homelessness. And we've done probably more than 100 different press events since I've been mayor around homelessness. This is a briefing of what the city's efforts are. Let me tell you what it's not. It doesn't obviously encompass many of the good things that the county is working on and other nonprofit and other agencies, but a chance for folks to hear from city leaders about what the city continues to do in the fight of our lives and the most important fight that we face. This is part of my commitment to the City of Los Angeles to help lead in this fight to end homelessness on the streets of LA. But before we dig into our main topic this morning, I want to say a few words about what has happened over the weekend with the earthquakes near Ridgecrest. We know that we were spared the worst here in Los Angeles of those quakes. And first and foremost, our heart goes out to those communities. Thank God there was no loss of life, but there has been lives that have been disrupted, cities that will need to be rebuilt, and much work that remains ahead of us. The damage to homes and businesses and to communities was significant. And the courage and professionalism of our first responders was extraordinary. Here in Los Angeles, the contingency plans, the protocols worked as they should. We had firefighters 3 different times that rolled out immediately from every single fire station to do what we call windshield surveys, to assess the infrastructure, helicopters in the air from the Department of Water and Power, teams out there. The biggest damage that we had in the city of Los Angeles was the first quake had 3 different circuits that went out. The second earthquake, the second big one, the 7.1, had 1, and we were able to restore within just a few hours the power for customers that were affected. But we should take these earthquakes as a reminder to be prepared, to have a plan, to talk to our families, to talk to our friends, to talk today as you go back to work. What's the plan at work? Where do we go? And if communications are down, have an analog plan in a digital era. And you can go to readyla.org to go through that checklist of different things that you can do to prepare. And at 3 a.m. on Saturday morning, just hours after the 7.1 earthquake, our urban search and rescue team went out to Ridgecrest. They're assigned to Fire Station 77 there, and they'll be working 12-hour work and rest shifts on structure assessment there as well. So, and I'm happy after we do homeless stuff to answer questions about that afterwards as well. But as we've seen in these past few days, when an emergency strikes, we have to be ready. And we have to bring all of our resources together to deploy the best possible response. That's what we do every single day here at the UHRC. This isn't something that we stand up occasionally. This is here 5 days a week during all work hours, the nerve center of our work to confront this humanitarian crisis in Los Angeles. Combine our resources, our knowledge, our programs to lift people off the streets, to get them into homes, and to keep our communities clean, healthy, and safe. The UHRC, which I opened a year ago, is where leaders from LAHSA, our Homeless Services Authority, and key city departments, including sanitation, street services, the fire department, the police department, recreation and parks, Department of Transportation, and others like Caltrans, work side by side. So often we said, this shouldn't be something where people have to go from one department to the next and one phone call or email chain to resolve issues. They should be together every single working hour. And it was a best practice that we saw in a couple other cities. We improved upon it and brought it right here. And this talented and dedicated team that is with us today is on the front lines of our daily fight against homelessness. We all know that homelessness is perhaps the most complicated issue that we will confront in our lifetimes. It is caused by decades of failures, of disinvestment, of our housing shortage, of trauma, including poverty, mental illness, income inequality, a surge in drug and alcohol addiction. And today, as the LAHSA homeless count made clear, it is an emergency. While we have housed more homeless Angelenos than ever before, in fact, just 4 years ago, we were housing about 9,000 a year. In this last count, this past year, we housed 21,600, nearly 22,000 people. And we've housed nearly 76,000 homeless Angelenos since 2014. Let that number sink in for a second. We have successfully, and I mean that in a positive way, housed 76,000 people whose lives have been transformed and improved by the work that we've done. And as a city, we've increased our homelessness budget 25-fold. Angelenos are still falling onto streets faster, though, than we can house them. So we have to do more and faster to overcome this crisis. Today, alongside Council President Herb Wesson, with whom I stood on the south lawn of City Hall some 4 years ago, 3 years ago before we put HHH before voters. And I know Mitch O'Farrell very much wants to be here. He's actually up in Sacramento lobbying on homelessness today, but the chair of the council's homelessness no longer ad hoc, permanent committee. We have shown at City Hall that commitment. I want to thank you, Council President Wesson, and the City Council for being such amazing team members. We also are blessed to have some tremendous state leaders here today. Holly Mitchell, who as the budget chair of the State Senate fought for and succeeded in getting the dollars that we are going to be talking about here today, and we are so grateful for your efforts and for your passion on this issue. And Miguel Santiago, who in Assembly has been similarly passionate and chairs the ad hoc the select committee on Los Angeles County homelessness, also represents Skid Row and downtown, and really is ground zero, not only in terms of the geography, but the political passion and advocacy. Together with a governor who himself took on homelessness when he was a mayor, and has continued to grow that attention, we have really a state dream team together with our local dream team working on this together, and of course we always thank our county colleagues. I want to talk to you about the city's response and update you on our progress, share our successes, and speak candidly about the challenges we face to rebuild lives here in Los Angeles, one Angelino at a time. After we give those updates, we'll be happy to answer your questions, and I know that our members need to head up to Sacramento today, so I want to be brief and then we'll come back for the larger presentation. But today we have great news to share. This budget of the state of California, signed into law on June 27th, allocates nearly $124 million directly to the city of Los Angeles to address this crisis. I'm so grateful for that work. Initially it was going to be about 40%, and thanks to Senator Mitchell, it's up to 45% of the $275 million given directly to cities. These funds are the result of advocacy of California's mayors, who 2 years ago went up to Sacramento after we got together, said at that time, 11 biggest cities in California, from north to south, inland to the coast, run by Republicans and Democrats, this was the #1 issue across California. And at a time of an unprecedented budget surplus generated by the hard work of our residents, we asked Governor Brown and the legislature to step up and do something, and they did. Those were the HEAP dollars. Then Governor Newsom and this legislature came together to rename it HHAPP dollars. I don't know how you pronounce it. We were saying maybe it's HAP, but the HAP dollars there. We said, in all seriousness, that with this surplus generated by the people of California, this was the issue that the people of California want the money spent on. They no longer want to tolerate people living on the streets outside their homes and their businesses. And we combined this year to be able to get those funds. Now, I want to be clear, it was 13 mayors now, and we asked for $2 billion, but you always ask for what you think you need, and you get what you get. And I always tell my daughter, you get what you get and you don't get upset. And you don't get upset. Thank you, Mom. Exactly. And we are not upset. We are actually quite pleased about this. Our state leaders came through with a sizable investment in this fight. $275 million for all of the cities of those top 13 cities, $124 million nearly here just for the city of LA. Now, I want to be clear, we have 51% of the homeless population for point-in-time count, which would result in about $17 million more. That's not the fault of these folks, but I had the support of every other mayor, and I do hope that Sacramento, either that they can fix that or in future years, will make sure that those dollars go per person. Every homeless person is worth the same across this state. And these dollars, as I mentioned, called HAP, or the Homeless Housing Assistance and Prevention Program, also include money for our counties and our continuums of care. Here in Los Angeles County and the continuum of care, that'll be an additional $146 million, which will also be spent in our city. So the 124 is not going to be in a vacuum by itself. But for the dollars directly under the city's control, I'd like to share what I'm proposing to invest these dollars towards the 6 priorities we have had and that we had last year with our HEAP dollars. Part of our all-of-the-above approach. People always ask, what's your strategy? And I say, well, it has to be everything. It has to be housing. It has to be services. It has to be immediate shelter beds. It has to be all of those proven strategies that we know are part of that long journey back for many people who have lived on our streets for too long. So first, we're going to remain laser focused on the prevention of homelessness, with more than $14 million of this allocation being invested in keeping people in their homes. We'll support our eviction defense program, which we put into the budget this year, deliver emergency rental assistance to to households teetering on the edge, and to help people reunify with their families, because there's nothing better than preventing. And these investments add to the $3 million allocated by the City Council for our eviction defense program, designed to ensure that tenants know their rights and they avoid wrongful evictions that leave people without a place to go and cost us all a lot of money. Second, we're going to set aside nearly half of that $124 million to more fully realize our interim housing program. About $66 million so we can get shelter, beds, and sites opened up faster than before. Third, we'll invest more than $9 million in innovative and alternative permanent housing models. What does that mean? Shared housing, where people take a home and live together, master leasing of motels, or rental subsidies for especially vulnerable populations. Fourth, we'll put more than $7 million of new funding in our place-based strategy, specifically in Skid Row. Part of our strategy is that we have to call Skid Row out, work with Skid Row advocates and community members, and meet their needs so that we can make sure that Skid Row one day is a thing of the past, not something we accept as part of Los Angeles. Fifth, recognizing the spike in young people living without a roof over their heads last year, we're going to allocate nearly $10 million specifically for homeless youth so that they do not become chronically homeless. And last, we'll put $16.5 million into more public health services for those who are unsheltered on our streets. That will mean pairing hygiene resource with housing, outreach, and employment services so that people can have a clean and healthy environment while they rebuild their lives and access housing. Now, we're going to have further conversations with the city, and when it does, I will make sure, together with our council, that we use it the right way. Thank you to our state leaders for helping bring that money here. We will make you proud. At this point, before we dive even further into some more updates, I want to invite my colleagues to share a few words. And as I mentioned, first, we have a tight-knit city family that is united in our work to combat homelessness. I'm so proud that our council president has made homelessness maybe the signature priority of his time in office. And Mitch O'Farrell, who I mentioned, is the homelessness and poverty chair, who couldn't join us today. We know that on our side in this fight, we have great allies. So let me turn it over to Council President Wesson, and then we'll hear from our state leaders who brought home the money. Council President Wesson.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming today, and I want to thank the mayor. What a lot of you don't know is when the mayor first became the mayor, and I was a new council president at the time, we've never really spoken of this. We met early one Saturday morning at my house in my living room, and we talked about this issue, and that's the very first time that I heard the mayor say that this is not an issue, this is the issue for the city of Los Angeles. And from that point on, it's been a phenomenal partnership between the mayor's office and the city council. But another thing that we discussed on that early Saturday morning was that in order for us to be successful, in this fight, that government at every level was going to have to come together. And I'm so proud that you're beginning really to see that happen. We partner directly with the county, and we've done some phenomenal things together. But today is about really giving a shout out, so to speak, to Holly and Miguel, our colleagues in Sacramento that we count on in the city of Los Angeles. Colleagues that we call on that don't refuse. They figure out a way to get it done. And in order for us to get a handle on this, and I have always been wanting to use this word, this is the most vexing issue that I have ever dealt with. In order for us to be successful, every level of government is going to have to come together and put people first. And that's what's happening. And I'm just so proud of the support that we've gotten from Sacramento, from the governor, but again from Holly and Miguel. And want you to know that We will do our very best to spend this money wisely. The mayor has laid out plans as to his priorities. The council, for the most part, share his priorities, and together, as we always do, we'll come together and figure out a plan. And I'm also very excited to hear when you look at the number of individuals that we have changed their lives and put them off the street and have given them a second chance at life, and that's what this country is all about. This is a country of second chances. But that now we're going to put a greater emphasis on prevention, because it doesn't help us when we take 10 people off the street and then 12 more go on. And so with spending more money on the front end, continuing to build and creatively come up with ways to take people off the street, I think we're going to see some movement in a positive direction. The plan that we have is sound. We just need to add to it more for prevention, maybe more affordable housing, maybe a program between organized labor and business where we take these people that are on the street and help them get real jobs. So there's a lot to be grateful for and excited about. But today I just wanted to be here on behalf of the City Council to thank my colleagues, because together we can get this done. And another thing that you're seeing is that we are really establishing a partnership with the organizations that are on the street, the individuals that fight this on a daily basis, individuals that come to City Hall and yell and scream and beat us up sometimes, but we are listening to them. And so at least we're trying to do everything that we can to address this, and I'm just excited to be a part of it. And again, I don't have the words to thank Holly. I do not have the words to thank Miguel, and I'm calling you by your first names because you're my friends, and I love you, and I thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Council President. Thank you for your passion and your beautiful words on this. It really is a single team here. Next, I'd like our Senate Budget Chair to come forward. As I mentioned, she has to get up to Sacramento, so we are so grateful she made time to be here. These negotiations happen behind closed doors in Sacramento. Unfortunately, the Brown Act doesn't apply to you guys, but when it goes down, you want to have a friend in the room. And literally, there are millions of dollars more in this because of Holly Mitchell's advocacy, and as somebody whose background has been in looking at how we address poverty and the sources of homelessness, she is uniquely positioned to have been that voice. We thank her and love to hear from her now. Holly Mitchell.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Council President. Good morning. You know, I had the opportunity in 2013, I think it was my first year elected Senate, I was asked to lead a Senate delegation by the pro tem at the time to go to Utah to see firsthand how Utah ended chronic homelessness, reduced chronic homelessness by 90% over a 10-year period. It was a delegation of one, but a delegation nonetheless. And I learned a great deal. First, I saw for the first time, I'm sad to say, what happens when every level of government comes together and identifies an issue as our top priority. From the governor, from the state, county, cities, across party lines, through transitions of leadership. It didn't matter. I also saw what happens when government, business, and in the case of Utah, the church, come together and agree that there is a single issue that they're all going to focus on, and they rallied around a single set of priorities. It was in Utah where I saw what Council President has led when they said to us, we've got to disperse the resources so you don't have a singular skid row that the Assemblyman and I have the pleasure of representing those constituents in Sacramento, but to make sure that every community has resources for their own community members who are suffering when they don't have a place to live. Those were, I also learned about the benefit of having Housing First State, which we came back, introduced the bill. California is now a Housing First State. And we also saw the value of a Homeless Coordinating Council. We came back. California now has a Homeless Coordinating Council that this governor funded significantly in this budget. I think it's important to not only look at the dollars you identified, Mr. Mayor, but to look broadly across the budget. Thanks to our work this year, the CalWORKS grant has a 25% increase. Because what we've learned is one of the major drivers of homelessness is an inability to pay your rent. And so for the first time to be able to give the CalWORKS grant a 25% boost will help stem the tide of people becoming homeless. We also learned from amazing models up and down our very own state that if we can reduce the duration, the period of time of your first homeless experience, we will prevent the likelihood of that family becoming homeless chronically over time. And so the CalWORKS increase is very significant. As a native Angelino, Mr. Council President, Mr. Mayor, I'm only doing what I'm supposed to do on behalf of my own friends, family, and neighbors, Angelinos, who are entitled, in my humble opinion, to a roof over their heads. The CalWORKS grant increase is important when we look at Skid Row and see the number of homeless families. We must do better, and we can do better. And thanks to this budget and the partnership at the state, county, and city level, we will do better. And I'm proud to just be a part of that solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Senator Mitchell. Also beautifully said. And finally, a man who often is my last text of the day and first text of the morning. He is tireless and passionate about this issue. He said, let's get that money, let's go after it. We wouldn't also be here without his incredible advocacy. Please welcome our Assembly Member, Miguel Santiago.
Thank you. And I want to thank the city for stepping up, particularly the mayor, council president, and of course we owe a huge debt of gratitude to the budget chair on the Senate side who has been fearless in this fight. And believe me, these fights are real when you talk about dollars in Sacramento. And they are real up until the last minute. And I could tell you, we've been in the trenches. We've been in the trenches for 2 years now in Sacramento, digging up homeless dollars. Last year, if you recall, when we stood in Skid Row and said we're going to go after 1.5 billion, and we put up one heck of a fight and pushed the governor to get us $500 million. And significant amount of that would go to Skid Row. About 20 million of last year's HEAP dollars are going to Skid Row, and it's what you're seeing implemented today. This year, we rolled up our sleeves and said, let's push a little harder. And we're successful in getting $650 million. Now, the city of Los Angeles will get its fair share. We would have wanted more, but we fought hard to get a better percentage. And for that, we want to thank you, Madam Chair, and want to thank the council president and the mayor for rolling up their sleeves and fighting for this. Here's where we're at today, and I think we recognize that homelessness is an issue of biblical proportions. I mean, it's spreading across the country. It is growing in California, and the numbers upticked here in Los Angeles. Now, we recognize that that is unacceptable, but it's also important to recognize that we rolled up our sleeves, we fought, and this is ground zero for how we show the rest of California when there's accountability to how we use dollars, when we prioritize it, when we make this the most important issue, and when we say that one person on the street is way too many. When we understand that what's at stake is how people will view California and Los Angeles in history. Look, not too far away from here, there's tents. Not too far away from here, there's little kids on the street. This is something that we could have never imagined. And that's why we're here today, because it is the most important issue of our lifetime. Budget is one thing, but we're also pushing on legislation to streamline the shelters and the housing necessary for homelessness. And we're partnering up with the mayor. We're hoping the city gets involved, and we're going to work with our Senate colleagues so that the HEAP dollars are streamlined, that the HHH dollars are streamlined, and that the HAP dollars are streamlined. And that's AB 1197. And we're going to push extremely hard because we've got, what's at stake is putting people in homes. Y para los medios de comunicación en español, nosotros reconocemos que la pelea más importante de nuestra generación es combatir al desamparado y que no tiene vivienda. Y es por eso que estamos aquí, no solamente luchando por el presupuesto que refleje nuestros valores y quiera dar vivienda a gente en necesidad, pero también empujando por legislación que nos ayude a hacer ese tipo de vivienda una realidad inmediata. Y es por eso que queremos reconocer al alcalde, al presidente concejal y a la senadora, que de veras luchó fuerte, no solamente por el presupuesto, pero también por pólizas para ayudarnos a combatir los desamparados y tener que cada niño, que cada persona que vive en las calles tenga un hogar. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Assemblymember. And I'll say a few remarks in Spanish a little bit later as well, and I think you spoke better than any Democratic candidate for president, I heard, so good job. Let me dig in a little bit as well. I know if you need to peel up, but stay if you need to stay. I know you got different timing as well, but let me give you an overall update, and we'll be going to the screens here on our city's response to homelessness crisis since the beginning of the LAHSA point-in-time count. Those numbers were announced on June 4th. And as we run through each facet of our strategy, what's working and how we're working to improve efforts here in the city, I think it's important to remember the city isn't in this fight alone. We don't have most of the tools required to attack the issue from every angle. We need critical affordable housing resources from the federal government. We need tenant protections, effective mental health care policy, and regional strategy from the state. And we've got great legislators pushing for some of those things, like Assemblymember Santiago's CEQA reform bill. And we need the critical health, substance abuse, and social services resources that are in the county to really sync together to truly see an end to homelessness on our streets. I only say that not at all as a criticism of those levels, although the federal government I will criticize, but because I think a lot of people say, and come up to me, as rightfully so, because I do accept responsibility as I've written to this city, not for the cause of homelessness, which some people ask me, no more than I accept the responsibility for the causes of crime, but the response to it. But the city is only one player in that. There are certain things we don't have. We don't have mental health programs. We don't have hospitals. We're not in charge of the foster care system. We aren't about reintegrating veterans who come home from war with PTSD. All those things that drive folks in, and those feeder systems are not controlled by the city, which makes our partnership absolutely critical. But today is briefing what the city is doing. So let's hit the first slide, June by the numbers. So, street strategies. Now, here in the city limits, there's been a lot of attention on the condition of our streets and its impact on the health and safety of people who are suffering on the streets and the community as a whole. So I can report that citywide in the month of June, we had more than 1,200 individuals who were contacted by a city-funded LAHSA outreach worker during a 3-week period in June. So it's probably more like the pace of about 1,600 a month. That's a fraction, by the way, of the outreach being conducted by multidisciplinary teams and other county-funded resources, but these are the city direct-funded ones. We did 500 comprehensive cleanups at encampments. 394 additional visits were made by a sanitation team to encampments to ensure that sidewalks were passable, and 1,347 tons of solid waste were removed from our streets by LA sanitation crews. Of that, 82% of that came from illegal dumping, 18% came from homeless encampments. Our environmental compliance inspectors removed 3,999 needles from public space as well. Next slide. So in every encampment, in every neighborhood, we need a targeted approach. That's why we've created special engagement zones around many of our bridge home shelters to saturate resources in highly impacted neighborhoods and deliver safer, cleaner streets. In the zone around El Puente, a bridge home shelter downtown just a few blocks away from here, our city teams made 445 contacts between an outreach worker and an individual experiencing homelessness since the program opened. We've removed 2.09 tons of solid waste in June alone, and as promised, since El Puente opened, we've reduced the most serious crimes, what we call Part 1 crimes, by 25%. Since we launched enhanced services in the zone around the Schrader, the Hollywood, a bridge home shelter, in April, our city teams have made 963 contacts between an outreach worker and somebody experiencing homelessness. I went out with those teams in Schrader just 2 weeks ago. They've removed more than 26 tons of solid waste, and we've seen robberies fall by 22%, burglaries down by 25% in that area. And 3 weeks ago, we introduced our new sanitation strategy, which redeploys our resources and hires 47 new sanitation workers to clean up our streets and our sidewalks faster. So instead of just relying on 311 calls, our comprehensive cleaning and rapid engagement, or CARE teams, will identify areas of highest need and lead with services. They're going to provide public health services to encampments, ensure that the hardest hit areas receive regularly scheduled cleanups and hygiene services that are predictable and known by the folks that are there, just as we know what our trash days are if we are housed. And these teams will also deliver resources like daily trash collection and mobile restrooms to folks on the street. Each care team is receiving specialized mental health training and be assigned to a specific location where they'll get to know the people and the geography they're assigned to, which will allow us to then be able to deploy much more efficiently these resources and to build real relationships between sanitation workers and homeless Angelenos. This is already rolling out in many areas and around Bridge Home, and it will be fully implemented by October 1st. We're hiring people up as we speak with a fiscal year that started on July 1st. After then, we'll provide you with regular updates on how the care teams are going, and I want to thank goodness I'm starting the city's first public health task force, which will hold its first meeting on Thursday. This new group brings just about everybody, our city administrative office, and any and all departments that touch public health. The task force will ensure that sanitation delivers on our new deployment plan and will bring together under one entity for the first time. There are illegal dumplings, we suspect, but illegal dumping and rodent abatement. And we received good news from the county last week that showed our collective work to combat the typhus outbreak from last year has been effective. And I'll address that in more detail in a few minutes. Next slide on bridge housing. Since we began our Bridge Home Shelter program in October, 4 facilities have opened. El Puente, as I mentioned, just downtown here, the birthplace of our city, the YWCA and Schrader sites in the Hollywood area, and Casa Azul in Westlake. Altogether, these are 222 beds with services for homeless Angelenos drawn from nearby high-density encampments. All the beds in those facilities, I can report, are full, and their service providers are working hard to get folks the help they need. I visited each of those personally, talked to many of the folks there. It's amazing when you go in there. We found an artist who then was a graffiti artist who literally did the art inside the Schrader place. I talked to a woman who's, when she became an empty nester and her son went off to college, suddenly found herself making it tougher and tougher to meet the rent until she was out on the street. She was talking to her mother when I walked by, and I talked to her mother, said that her daughter is now on a path to come home. They're incredibly moving stories when they go from statistics to actual people. And we know that these service providers are doing an amazing job helping many of those folks begin to exit out of those bridge home shelters and get into housing. Beyond that, we have 21 bridge home shelters in development across the city in every council district but one, and we will find one for that, with more than 1,900 beds set to open over the next 12 months in this fiscal year. And the past week, 2 more sites were identified by council members, and our city departments are looking to quickly add them to our pipeline. I say this because I often get questions from the media, well, isn't it really tough, like the council saying no? The toughest fights we had, like Koreatown, we solved that and moved 6 blocks. The one in Venice is moving forward. So besides those which generated a lot of headlines, council members have been falling over themselves to give sites and have really stepped up, and I want that to be part of the narrative. We do need to find a site in CD12, and there's a council race going there. I think both candidates in the runoff have pledged to do that, and we have some good ideas. 3 new shelters are set to open this summer alone, which will double the number of beds that are open already to 230 more beds. And just in the next couple of months, we'll see those open their doors. I visited these 3 construction sites over the last 2 weeks, and let me give you an update on their progress. In Council District 4, the Gardner Library, a beautiful building, modernist building, should be done this month, and 30 homeless Angelenos will begin moving in, thanks to Councilmember Rue, by the middle of August. It's 4,000 square feet, will offer trauma-informed care for residents, women who are now unsheltered in Hollywood. St. Andrew's Place in Council District 8, Marquise Harris Dawson's district, construction is expected to be complete on August 12th. Some of you were just at the groundbreaking a couple months ago, with 100 beds for men and women to open in the first week of September. And homelessness in South LA rose 22% this year, so I know that Councilmember Harris Dawson wants to fill those beds quickly. We anticipate that will be done within a week. Imperial Highway, adjacent to Council District 15 in the southern reaches of the district, on a site owned by the City Housing Authority. Construction is due to be finished August 29th, with 100 beds for adults and slated to be open September 17th under the leadership of Councilmember Buscaino. These are 3 great examples of what we accomplish when we pull together. Those span tents are coming up in 60 days. Sometimes it takes longer because you got to grade, you got to put in plumbing, but we are working around the clock, 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. So you'll ask sometimes why the price up. I'd rather spend a little more on overtime and get them done quickly than go slow and do just, the 8-hour days, 5 days a week. So right now we have 222 beds, as I mentioned. By the end of the year, another 976 beds by the end of this calendar year. And during the second half of the fiscal year, from January to June, we'll add another 756 beds. That'll bring our total stock of bridge housing to just under 2,000 beds, 1,954 over the next 12 months. It is happening. Next, affordable, supportive, and permanent housing. Housing homeless Angelenos requires, as the speakers have said up here, also building more affordable housing. When I took office, the city didn't have the tools it needed to build this housing. And it had, as you can see in the chart here, if we can go to the chart, I think it's in the next slide, we had slowed almost to a halt at the Great Recession what we were building. You can see 2009. It exacerbated a shortage that had built up since the 1980s. You look at all those decades, besides the mid-2000s, it really had been this tranche where we had not built what the city needed, and we wonder why people can't afford the rents. Available land became scarce. Communities of color were left more vulnerable to gentrification after getting hit by the worst of the subprime foreclosure crisis. At the same time, the state dissolved the redevelopment funds that were so critical to our affordable housing, and federal government embraced automatic spending cuts known as the sequester, depleting the available investments for subsidies in available housing. We think that there are tens of billions of dollars over the last 2 decades that have been cut by federal government and by the loss of redevelopment. In fact, since 2008, LA County lost 70% of our affordable housing dollars, an average loss of $500 million a year. So as we started to tackle this massive crisis, we understood our first priority was to grow our supply of local housing. We set a very ambitious target of 100,000 units over an 8-year period by 2021, and we are close to meeting that goal 2 years ahead of schedule. But we still don't have enough affordable housing. That's why we now charge developers a linkage fee, first talked about by Tom Bradley, passed by this city council and myself, to raise $50 to $100 million either in cash or in affordable housing over the next decade, each year over the next decade. And I want to encourage our neighbors across the county, across the region, and throughout the state to step up and do their fair share. And there are many towns that are. But the city of LA is building 75% of all new housing in LA County, and we're only 40% of the population. 20% of the state's new housing, and we're only 10% of the population. We're not doubling our fair share, we're at our fair share. Other people aren't meeting their fair share. So we urge them to do the same. The most urgent need is supportive housing that gets our vulnerable homeless Angelenos housed permanently. That's what voters approved with Prop HHH. At the end of May, the very first facilities project, partially funded by HH dollars, which is the campus at LA Family Housing, opened in North Hollywood. I just toured it a few days ago. It has capacity for 49 permanent residents and 250 residents of bridge housing. So between Prop HHH and other funding sources, we now have 110 supportive housing projects that are in the pipeline right now. And when they're completed in the months and years ahead, we're looking at more than 7,400 units. But unfortunately, construction of housing for homeless Angelenos has been costly and too slow over the last few years. That's why we hired 4 new staffers in my Office of City Homeless Initiatives, led by my Chief Housing Officer, Ben Winter, who is standing right there, to speed up the approvals needed to get shovels in the ground quicker and construction done faster. Having those permanent staff members rounds out our city's Office of City Homelessness Initiatives to 15 people on a team that didn't exist 6 months ago under the leadership of Christina Miller over there, second in from your left. So we've gone from having no one in the city solely responsible for leading our response to this emergency to a CLA assigned to this, to an office in the CAO's office, and 15 people in the mayor's office that are dedicated to this challenge more than we've ever seen in any administration. And I want to highlight some of the HH projects that are due to open so you can get a sense of them as well. By early 2020, we see 327 of those units, 224 of which are supportive units, will be open. Like in Council District 8 on 88th and Vermont, it's on track to open late fall with 62 units, 46 of them are supportive housing, the others are affordable housing. Council District 8 also has the Western Avenue apartments in late fall, which will open with 33 units, 32 of them are supportive housing with HHH dollars. Here in Council District 14, the 649 Lofts project will open 55 units, 28 of which are supportive housing in October, and it has a health center below, something critical, the Joshua House Health Center. And by spring 2020, we expect phase 2 of the Path Metro Villas project to finish in Council District 13 with 122 units, 90 of them supporting. These are big projects, many of them. And in early spring of next year, we'll see a new addition to the LA LGBT Center, McAdden Plaza Youth Housing, which will have 55 total units, 20 of them supportive. So overall, we're on track for more than 1,000 affordable and supportive housing units to be opened by the end of this fiscal year, 12 months from now. Skid Row. We all know the epicenter of this crisis is Skid Row. It's where the extreme poverty cuts deepest. It's where the racialized elements of this homelessness crisis are most seen in a town with about 10% or 11% African Americans, and a majority of folks in Skid Row who are experiencing homelessness are African American. It's where we have to get a much better handle on issues of public health. So when I named Christina Miller as deputy mayor, first deputy mayor ever for city homelessness initiatives, I told her the days of writing off this community were over. And I named a director of a Skid Row strategy, Kirkpatrick Tyler, who's just behind me, to have one person actually responsible for city work in Skid Row. We started making strategic investments by listening to the residents of Skid Row, forming new and stronger partnerships. It's not going to be fast in Skid Row or easy or always satisfying and easy to see. That is part of the vexing nature of this, but it will be real, and I'll be sharing both our successes and challenges with you in the months and years to come. With the initial state funds, as Assemblymember Santiago mentioned, came in last year, the HEAP dollars, we directed $20 million to the following projects and initiatives. The council member for the district said when we first put in our city budget some millions of dollars, he said, I could use $20 million just for Skid Row. Well, we said, if we get the state money, we'll do it, and we lived up to that word. Those were new crisis and diversion beds for women and families supported by the Downtown Women's Center and the Salvation Army. For the families, we're working to secure interim beds so we can start addressing their needs immediately. No family should be living in Skid Row. Increased hygiene infrastructure. How can you begin to come off the street when you can't feel clean, when you can't quench your thirst? We have mobile showers. 8 new dumpsters strategically placed throughout Skid Row for easy access, and a doubling of trash cans now picked up during the day and at night, 7 days a week, to ensure that we have that sort of sanitation services. We significantly expanded our storage capacity with 30,000 new units, so our homeless neighbors have more safe, clean places to store their belongings, so they can go to that job interview or go to that doctor's appointment and get on the path to healthy lives. And 2 additional homeless engagement teams were assigned to Skid Row, drastically expanding our outreach capacity so that we can continue improving that in Skid Row. We also took out a 3-year lease on a 119-bed program for single adults in the Arts District, which will include health services provided by the county and led by Home at Last. This is under construction and should be ready by the fall. We also have, of course, our first sobering ambulance, which goes around Skid Row and downtown if somebody is overdosing or is extremely intoxicated. Instead of taking them to the hospital, county hospital, where they get well, but we have a firefighter or 2 or 3 who have wall time and can't serve anybody else for hours, and then they go back and they repeat the cycle. They now take them to a sobering center where they can get healthy. One woman who over 54 times we had picked up in a 3-year period was finally taken there, and she has been sober and she is in housing for good. A new $2 million Skid Row street cleaning program is part of what we spent money, employing 20 residents of Skid Row to help keep Skid Row clean, and that will start later this summer. This will be coordinated with additional sanitation services already provided as well. And that last program, to get people employed and improve cleaning, as some of the speakers have talked about, is very important to me. We always say nothing stops a bullet like a job. I believe nothing solves homelessness like a job as well. And after the outbreak last year, I'm proud to report that cases of flea-borne typhus have returned to baseline levels. Remember, we had 17 cases, I think, last year in the downtown area. Just a single case has been confirmed more than 6 months into 2019, and we're returning to the average numbers we've seen in recent years, and the county has lifted that. I didn't see much of that out there, but I wanted you to inform the public of that as well. It doesn't mean our work is done, far from it, but Angelenos should know that we did contain that issue, we addressed the immediate challenge, and we got at-risk folks on Skid Row the services and support that they need. We're going to be even more vigilant and proactive going forward through the work of the Public Health Task Force that I mentioned. So everything we do in Skid Row and beyond is viewed first through the lens of how we can improve our work to protect health and safety for all Angelenos. So last couple slides here, also on the public health front. At the end of 2017 in Skid Row, we opened the Refresh Spot. It was a personal care center that was an idea from Skid Row residents with showers, toilets, laundry facilities for Angelenos who are experiencing homelessness. And I'm pleased to report that the spot is outperforming expectations. We thought we'd see about 250 people a day. We exceeded that by an additional 400 additional users every day, 650 a day. So we're going to expand it, and this fall we will quadruple its size, increase the number of washers, dryers, and drinking fountains, add new community spaces where Skid Row residents can receive services, participate in recreational activities, and build stronger relationships with service providers on the ground to assist them. And in August, we'll open a new bin facility to expand the 1,493 units where Skid Row residents can now safely store their most valuable belongings. At the top of this briefing, we spoke about advocacy and the growing strength of our partnerships in Sacramento. But I want to challenge Washington, D.C., because we need more leadership coming out of our nation's capital. I remember when I was just a kid and starting to get involved in this issue, being so impressed with seeing then President Reagan and Speaker Tip O'Neill and Senator Kennedy come together across party lines to say this was a national crisis, the last time we really saw national leadership on this. But after decades of federal disinvestment in affordable housing, in drug rehabilitation, and mental health care, Washington has been largely absent from the movement to end homelessness. And we need to elevate this issue to the national crisis that it is. However, we're fortunate to have some very strong advocates on Capitol Hill who are working to put this issue front and center. Last month at City Hall, I co-hosted with Maxine Waters and several members of LA's congressional delegation a briefing on our work and a conversation on how to bring the power and resources of the federal government to this fight. After attending the annual meeting of the U.S. Conference of Mayors 2 weeks ago, I assembled a coalition of mayors from across the country to unanimously call on Congresswoman Waters and this legislation would direct $13 billion for more services to expand Section 8 vouchers for at-risk families, bring folks indoors immediately to help with shelters, and Senator Dianne Feinstein and Congressman Ted Lieu also introduced legislation focusing on health, a 5-year, $750 million a year grant program for homeless services. And there are more proposals to grow the stock of affordable housing across the country that I love seeing in our presidential candidates as well, making it easier for low-income families to pay their rent or their mortgage. But as I mentioned last week, I was pleased to hear the president talking about homelessness. Any day the commander-in-chief is talking about homelessness, for me, that's a good day. And as I also pointed out, he said it started 2 years ago. I'm happy to let him know that homelessness did not start when he became the President of the United States of America. He is not singularly responsible, nor are any of us. But together, we do have the power to save lives. If he wants to meet at the White House or come here and walk Skid Row, I extend that invitation again to President Trump. This issue is not about scoring political points. As I said, I know people expected me to punch him back and say it's all his fault. It's not. It is our collective responsibility. And if people are serious about addressing it and doing something as he said he wanted to, we should get together and make that happen. I will bring mayors together from across this country. We will storm Washington, D.C., and we will get to work by rolling up our sleeves. Homelessness is a national issue. It's caused by decades of failures and negative trends, and we need more federal assistance. We generate those tax dollars. We need them to come back here to respond to this emergency. And finally, in this closing slide, as I mentioned in my letter last month to the people of Los Angeles, our ability to turn adversity into progress is what makes us the City of Angels. This team are like policy firefighters. A lot of politicians run away from this issue when they see the burning. We're running to it because we see the human cost. As a father, I don't want my daughter to grow up in a city where she thinks this is normal. I get woken up at night by people who are half a block down the street from my own home. When I walk to go get breakfast, I talk to unhoused Angelinos. This is a personal passion of mine, and this is one in which we are all called to. As we've seen after the Northridge earthquake and the civil unrest of 1992, the Great Recession, we don't run from challenges. We run to them, and we will with homelessness. So I promise it's not a Spanish translation of all that. Let me just say a couple pages in Spanish, and then we'll open up for questions. Bienvenidos al Centro de Respuesta a la Indigencia y Unificado de Los Ángeles. Este es el centro de nuestro trabajo para enfrentar esta crisis humanitaria y unir cada recurso que tenemos para sacar a las personas de las calles y mantener nuestras comunidades limpias, sanas y seguras. La indigencia es un problema estatal y nacional que es difícil y complejo. Hoy, como lo hizo claro este último conteo, sabemos que es una emergencia. Aunque hemos alojado a más personas indigentes que nunca y nunca aumentado el presupuesto para la indigencia, hay angelinos que todavía siguen terminando en las calles de manera más rápida de que podemos alojarlos. Entonces, tenemos que hacer más y más rápidamente para superar esta crisis. Hoy quisiera hablar sobre la respuesta de nuestra ciudad para ponerlos al día con nuestro progreso, compartir nuestros logros y hablar de manera franca de nuestros retos. En primero, unas buenas noticias gracias a este equipo estatal de senadora Holly Mitchell y asambleísta Miguel Santiago. El nuevo presupuesto del Estado distribuye $124 millones a la ciudad de Los Ángeles directamente, un aumento del 45% desde el año pasado. Estas inversiones apoyarán 6 prioridades: evitar la indigencia, viviendas provisionales, modelos de viviendas permanentes, nuestra estrategia de Skid Row, la indigencia juvenil y la salud pública. Estos fondos no pueden esperar y cuando lleguen, aseguraré de que los utilizaremos de inmediato para fortalecer nuestro trabajo en curso de limpiar nuestras calles, agregar camas y espacio para más refugios en nuestra ciudad, construir comunidades sanas, cambiar el curso de esta crisis y alojar a nuestros vecinos. Gracias. With that, on homelessness first, I'm sure